Well, you know what Tuesday means, or at least you think you do. Just to be certain that you're paying attention, we've decided to shake things up a little bit. You probably expected a little Tuesday with Ezra. You probably expected The Godfather. I'll tell you something, we got something, I don't want to say better because I'm scared of Ezra as it is. We got something a little different. With us is the author of the smash bestseller, Why Catholics Are Right, which you can also find under its alternate title, Vatican III. Joining us is author, columnist, gadabout, the raconteur.
Hello.
Michael Coren.
Much better than Ezra. I'm way cheaper.
Better than Ezra. We should form a band. Okay, now, you heard the account update, and I was talking about the whole both sides thing. And if you and I do this correctly, and basically there are only two people in the world who can pull this off, and you're both of them. If you and I do this correctly, we're going to take this whole idea of looking at both sides of issues, and we're going to start in Syria, Middle East, Israel, and we're going to end up in Hyde Park in Toronto. Watch this, okay? So, I get a lot of breeze, as you know. People want to hear the left, as though the left isn't represented in the media in this country. And one issue we talked about on this program yesterday were the incursions at least 3 different places in the Syria-Israel border. And we had a professor from Montreal on to talk about it, talking about these Syrian people who might have been sponsored by the Syrian government, the Assad dictatorship, going into Israel. And we heard from people, I think we had a good discussion, we heard from people saying, well, you didn't give the Palestinian point of view, you didn't talk about the Palestinian point of view. To which I say, the Palestinian point of view is pervasive. It's easy to find. And I wanted to give this fellow his say. What's your take, though, on the Middle East and Israel? Get us in some trouble, why don't you? Israel in general, and the recent incursions from Syria to Israel.
Well, first of all, it has nothing to do with the Palestinians. And the Palestinians, I mean, this has to be settled. This issue has to be settled with the entire Middle East, including Israel. There are all sorts of countries that don't treat the Palestinians properly. Most of them are Arab countries, not Israel. This was a nasty, moribund dictatorship in Syria trying to distract and digress from the fact that it's killing hundreds of people. Probably more than 1,000 people have now been slaughtered by little boy Assad after Daddy handed power over to him. Dad, by the way, killed tens of thousands of people in one single village alone. So he sent people across. One of them got to Tel Aviv. Now, the IDF, the Israeli army, could have simply killed all of those people trying to go across their border. And there are many countries, including Syria, Iran, Jordan, Egypt. In Egypt, they shoot people, refugees, on a regular basis who try to cross over into their country. The Israelis, as per usual, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart and with all of my knowledge, as per usual, the Israelis showed enormous restraint. 10 Israeli soldiers were injured. Some of the people got through. One guy got to Tel Aviv. A Syrian infiltrator got to Tel Aviv. He had no bomb, but he shouldn't have been allowed in there. It's Israel. They're not allowed to come in. Israel and Syria are not in a state of war as such, but there's no treaty, there's no relationship. You can't simply cross a border, particularly where you have Lebanon and Hezbollah and Syria and its armed commandos all along that border. I've been there many, many times. So what Israel did, in fact, was it acted, again, like a civilized, democratic country. Iran doesn't do that, Syria doesn't do that, Lebanon doesn't do that. And then the audacity of these people, Syria and Iran go to the United Nations to issue a complaint. Iran then forced their one Jewish MP, a man who is a captive in Tehran, to go to the Iranian assembly and condemn the Israelis for the way they acted. Iran, where there are 2 civil wars going on, where again thousands of people are being slaughtered, where young gay men are hanged in public squares. Sometimes, if I had hair, Theo, I'd pull it out. You want to scream at the double standard. Whatever Israel does, it's condemned. So you know what? Next time there's a war in the north, and believe me, there will be, I will be here probably within a year or two talking to, I was at the last one in 2006 about it. Israel will go in very, very hard because if it's soft or hard, the same usual idiots condemn it.
You see, and this is what I don't get, and this is what I mean when I say the other side, the anti-Israel side, is so well represented in the media, in newspapers, and certainly in international bodies. You mentioned the United Nations. United Nations has spilled more ink and spent more time and done more chin-wagging condemning Israel than any other country in the world.
Oh, there are more resolutions against Israel than any other country. In fact, virtually every other country combined.
So, and this is a country, geographically, it's smaller than El Salvador, for goodness sake. Yet what is it, Michael, that this country of Israel is constantly blamed no matter what happens? It's always their fault. It's always back to the Palestinians. And as you rightly pointed out, it's not Israel necessarily to blame. How about their fellow Arabs or their fellow Muslims who have mistreated the Palestinian people? But it's always Israel. And I want to know from you, seriously, why?
Well, a point about the Palestinians, by the way, when Israel took what is known as the West Bank, they offered it back to the Jordanians. They said to King Hussein, you can have it back. We want part of Jerusalem, but you have it all back. And he said, are you kidding? I don't want them. You keep them. Now they're your problem. So let's remember that. And they have given back 80% of the land they conquered, the whole of the Sinai. There are elements of anti-Semitism, but that's too crass, it's too suburban. It's not really anti-Semitism as such. It's more vicarious anti-Americanism. They see Israel as representing the United States, which is a massive misreading of the situation, and it's a way to attack the Americans indirectly. Plus, it's the influence of oil.
All right. Now, let's segue very neatly and seamlessly into another case of oppression and occupation, and talk about High Park in Toronto.
The People's Republic of High Park.
Go ahead.
I live very close to High Park. Now, a plague on both their houses. Kids on BMX bikes sort of occupied a little region of the park, and they built these mounds, and they would cycle all over the place, knocking your child down, almost knocking you down, saying sorry. It was full of kids saying sorry, sorry. Not allowed. There are notices, no cycling, but the cops are too busy giving out parking tickets just down the road. Right. Now, a native group claiming that it's an ancient burial site. There have been repeated investigations, 40, no evidence
40
at all.
Investigations.
Yeah, 40 in all.
Yeah.
No, it isn't. Yeah, we say it is because we have the oral evidence. So they've now occupied this territory. The newly elected local councillor and the local cops are going there saying, oh, isn't this lovely? They're bringing in a porta potty, a toilet they can use, a shed for them to put their tools in. So 2 illegal occupations and nothing being done about it. And you know, the BMX kids, they're teenagers, they don't have jobs to go to. You think the native... Actually, I won't finish that sentence.
Okay, well, listen. You feel good? You're okay now? All right, so you never have liked, I mean, you've talked about these sorts of issues before. You don't like it when you have 2 sets of rules for 2 different people in the country?
Well, consistency is the quintessence of a democracy and a fair system.